So I'm just going to say a few words about why Prospect Community Housing got involved in a social history project and how we found our way into a partnership with a university, and then talk a little bit about what that was like, what benefits of that were, and also what some of the learning points we feel we've come from that partnership. So Prospect Community Housing is in Wester Hailes. That's in southwest Edinburgh, and it's just on Heriot-Watt University's doorstep. We're just down the road from them. And we provide and manage about 900 properties for rent, socially affordable housing, all within Wester Hailes. We've chosen, at a time when many housing associations have amalgamated to become bigger entities, we've chosen to remain clearly community-based. We were set up by local people in 1988, and our community attachment will always be strong, and we're still managed by the people that live in the area. Like the majority of housing associations, we have a wider role element to our work, and that's really what I'm employed to do. I'm the Community Projects Officer for Prospect. Our core business will always be housing, but it takes a lot more to build a community than just homes. So we initiate and support projects that we think will benefit our tenants, but also the wider area that our tenants are living in, because that benefits them as well. We try to make sure that anything that we do complements what's already going on, and that it fits in with area needs and local priorities. We work in partnership pretty much always when we're dealing with wider role, and we feel that our resources and our capacity enable us sometimes to act as an anchor organisation. And in our partnerships, we deliver a wide range of projects. We've worked with young people, we have employability projects, health and well-being, environmental projects, and also projects that are probably harder to define, but are around building capacity and looking at how you empower local people. So one of the projects that we got involved with was one we called From There to Here, to look at how we could use social media to engage with local online users. We wanted to encourage interaction and to see whether we could build a network. And as Peter's already mentioned, there was a newspaper for Wester Hailes called the Sentinel. It was a local community newspaper which was highly successful, not only in sharing local information, but also as being a real voice for the area and had a real campaigning role. Unfortunately, when its funding came to an end a few years ago, the paper folded, and a huge archive was in danger of being lost. And so Prospect stepped in and said that we would house that archive in the meantime. So we took delivery of boxes and boxes of dusty old newspapers and thousands of photographs and probably in the millions of negatives. And then we thought, well, how can we get that information out there? What do we do to share that information with the local area? And we were part of a wider partnership of local organisations and residents who'd come together to look at how we could use the area's social history to publicise and promote community involvement. And so we started, after discussion with our central library, we started a social history blog, and weekly we blogged about a whole variety of aspects about Wester Hailes. Sometimes more general information, but often quite specific stories. For example, looking at how the high-rises came down, looking at the lack of infrastructure people had at the beginning, but also more sort of reminiscence-based pieces of information. And we felt that was successful, but what really changed how people interacted with the information we were putting up was the Facebook page that Peter was talking about. We found that people really enjoyed seeing those photographs, recognising themselves, but also often seeing an area where they grew up. And it's interesting, when we look at the photographs, we think, what a terrible place that must have been to live. When people who lived there as children look at it, they remember what an exciting place it was to live as a child. So we have some very different memories shared on Facebook, which is quite interesting. And we try to use, I suppose, positive images that celebrate the past and redefine the present. Peter was talking a lot about the stigma that's attached to Wester Hailes, and we didn't want to look at Wester Hailes with rose-tinted spectacles, but we also felt that there's a story of a community that isn't often told by wider society. People often look at Wester Hailes and just think it's an area defined by its problems. We wanted them to look at it and think there's an area that mobilised when they had nothing. When Wester Hailes was first built, there was just housing. There was no doctors, there was no services, there was just tower blocks and acres of car parks. And people got together and fought and fought and fought for community facilities, for places for their children to play, and for local services to be delivered on their doorstep. And we felt that was an important story to remember, but also to make sure that residents today knew that that was their history and that that could happen again. There was a capacity within the community to mobilise again. So as we met regularly as a group, there was a variety of organisations and local residents involved. One of our local residents, Ewan Howard, always recognised the potential value of getting universities involved in supporting what was going on locally within our group. And I suppose it was really a journey to partnership we took. If you're asking me, how do you go about getting into a partnership with a university, we kind of fell into it almost. So it might not be that helpful from that point of view. Our initial contact was via Edinburgh University's Urban Geography Department. They had a set of postgrad students who came to do research on marginality. They were looking for areas that they could compare locally in Edinburgh with towns and cities abroad. And they came and we hosted them on a number of occasions, and they came and did their research. And I guess it's fair to say that that partnership really had a limited long-term impact from our point of view. A very interesting book was produced, and it was interesting to read the research, but I'm not sure it changed what was happening in Wester Hailes very much. But what that initial contact did lead us to was a relationship with the Edinburgh College of Art. Dr. Chris Speed had a project called Community Hacking, and he was looking for a community to work with, and Wester Hailes suited that ideally. And that partnership really led to a set of activities and projects really focused on engagement and interaction and capacity building. So with the Community Hacking project, we started by linking into another project they were running called Tales of Things. This was taking everyday objects, sometimes historical, but sometimes just objects you find in your house, and giving them greater value by attaching a story to them. So it might be something that you remembered using, it might be something that was special to you. And the idea was you then attached a QR code to this object and you posted that online. People could read your story and see what your object meant, and it changed what the object was defined as, and it meant that your story was shared. So we used that with some of the Sentinel photographs. We took them to public events, and you can see that's their rather dinky memory booth disguised as a hut. And we used that. People would take the photograph into the hut and be recorded reminiscing about their memories of it was like the fun run we had, or we had pictures of the high-rises, we had the local playgrounds, and we had pictures of football teams. People remembered being involved with those aspects of Wester Hailes' history and recorded their stories. And that was when we really felt that there was a lot of potential value in using QR codes for a whole range of projects. And that really led to a whole raft of projects coming out. So we had the code books, which were QR-coded social history walks. These were developed by Ewan Howard and the Wester Hailes Health Agency. The Health Agency has a walking programme. It has health walks for local residents. The idea was to give those walks a theme. People could walk around, but as well as following the walk, they could scan the QR code and find out more information about the area that they were standing in, both past and present. Peter's referred to the totem pole. I have to say, if you want to learn about the complexities of a planning process, then try putting a totem pole in the ground. It took maybe a month for it to be carved and maybe 9 months to get all that sorted out. I'm sure if we'd known at the beginning how hard it was going to be, we might have thought twice. But it's up, and it has a series of QR codes around it that link to different local sites, one of which is the Facebook page that we operate. We're in the process of developing a project with RCAMS where we're looking at putting up QR codes or plaques on some of our properties. Again, the idea is people can scan those plaques and access information about the area past and present, but also access links to the ARCAM's archive, because they've got a huge amount of photographs that they can share. We're aware that much of this is online, and in an area like Wester Hailes, that can raise some interesting issues. We're in an area where ownership of PCs is probably lower than in more affluent areas. However, we do think that the ownership of smartphones is on the rise, and we don't see that changing. More and more people are now able to access technology that they couldn't access a few years ago. And we feel it's really important to equip people to learn new skills, particularly at a time when so much is moving online. We feel the more people can learn digital skills, the better that will be in other aspects of their lives as well. The other thing that came out of this partnership we've had with the universities has been a local partnership, Our Place in Time. And I guess in some ways that's almost like the legacy of the relationship we've had with the universities, that if and when they move on to Pastors New, we will have something locally in place that will carry on the work. The other major project that is happening at the moment that's linked to the totem pole is the digital Sentinel. The Sentinel newspaper was very much an independent community voice, and we felt the loss in Wester Hailes when it went down. However, the print world is now hugely expensive, and the idea of producing even a monthly newspaper we just didn't think would be sustainable, but an online resource is. It's being led by Whale Arts Agency again, who are involved with a local steering group that's drawn from local partners. And the idea is to create really a community space for Wester Hailes residents to share their news, their views, their interests, and their stories. It's really important that that content and format is driven by local residents. So although that's what we think it could look like, we're happy for it to change if people want to put something else in instead. And we want to use as many different free-to-access platforms as possible. So it's not just about people having to write a story. They could film a story. They could record a story. They could photograph a story. And we're currently training local residents who are interested in becoming citizen journalists to upload content and to share their stories. There's been 2 really good training sessions that have happened so far, and a 3rd one is planned. And I guess it was a bit of a step into the unknown. Would anyone be interested in being involved? And the positive answer was yes. People have come forward, and they want to be involved in this new project. So what do we think the benefits of the partnership have been? Well, we feel we've gained hugely in technical expertise and support. We've had support in setting up the back office for the Digital Sentinel. We have had support in developing QR codes, in developing the framework for a lot of the projects that we wouldn't have had access to technical expertise that would have been hard for us to have access otherwise. If I was being very pragmatic, I would say we've had access to funding. That's always an issue for the voluntary sector. It's brought new funding in. I know Peter said that there's only small amounts have come our way, but actually for the voluntary sector, those small amounts seem quite large. It's quite interesting that what our definitions of a lot of funding are is different for universities. I think it's brought us a fresh viewpoint. It's helped us have new ways of thinking and carrying out processes. That picture is of a whiteboard. That was, we were rather startled to receive that as a record of our meeting one day. But it has helped us think in different ways and to think maybe a bit outside the box as well. All these projects that I've developed, we feel have had innovation as a fundamental part of their process. It's linked us into a network that's enabled us to access wider opportunities. Once you get involved in that kind of partnership, you meet other potential partners, and that's what's been happening for us. It's also given us the chance to share knowledge and good practice. We've been able to go to a series of events and talk about what we've been doing and to pass on what we've learned, and that's always a good thing to be able to do to disseminate knowledge. And I think we've had ongoing support, and we think we can probably rely on that in the future for some of the future projects that we would like to develop. we feel there's been some important learning points from the whole process as well. I talked to other partners to see what they thought, and we all felt that you have to really establish reciprocity from the beginning. What is the community gaining from the relationship? I think because of Wester Hales's situation, because it has a certain notoriety, a lot of people want to come and do research there. It adds something to your research if you can say, and I was out in Wester Hales interviewing people. I think we've learned to be clear about what we're getting in return and to be more upfront about that, to start the process off by saying, well, if you want to come and do research here, what are you giving us in return? What are you leaving the community as your legacy? I think we've learned that your agenda should be driven by the local partners. I think when we started off, we might have been a little bit in awe of our university partners. And so occasionally they galloped away with the process, and then we all felt a bit grumbly about that. We've learned to be more assertive about that and to say, this is what we want to happen, and this is the process that we're going to go through. I think you have to understand that your university partner will be looking for specific outcomes that may be very different to other partners. The research outcomes are not what we're interested in, really, although they are interesting. What we're interested in is concrete results for people who are living in the area. What have they benefited from? I think it's fair to say your university partner may speak a different language on occasion. We've always sometimes had to have pauses when we explain to each other what we were on about. There is a challenge of differing timescales. I'll always remember when we initiated the whole totem pole process, we explained that to get match funding for that might take us between 3 and 6 months. And I remember the look of horror on our university partners' faces because they couldn't imagine that funding would take that long to get in for such a small amount. And Peter's right, it's very difficult to get everyone in the room at the same time, and the university partners are the worst. They're very hard to get in one room. And I think that the final thing I'd want to say is that long-term commitment from all your partners is really the key to success. It's not right or fair to expect a partnership to last 6 weeks. It needs to last for months and ideally years. There needs to be benefits on both sides. So everyone has to be clear that if you're coming into that kind of partnership from a university's perspective, that you're in it for the long haul. And that's what really benefits the local area, and that's where your legacy comes from.